Hello, my garden friends. This is Jersey Shore Lisa from MyNJGarden.com. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. It's June 19th, 2022. You can see behind me, I'm standing in front of my front yard food forest. It is a permaculture garden, and I would love to share my front yard garden tour with you. Please subscribe to the channel if you like these kinds of videos and join me for all my garden updates. I'd love to have you. Let's get started and take a look at what's growing in the yard, how it's maturing in this June 2022 season. This is the bed that's closest to my front door. And what we have here is getting a little crazy. And I'm fine with it. There's an azalea and some iris. There's a sword fern there. They have edible tubers. This is a native Virginia sweet spire, and it's blooming now. It's a deciduous shrub. It loves full sun. It doesn't really get more than 3.5 feet tall. It tends to be mounding if you let it. Behind that, the larger bit here is a witch hazel. And that's supposed to bloom in super early spring, and I miss the blooms this year because it doesn't let go of the leaves from the previous season until the new leaves start, and I think the blooms kind of happen under those old leaves, so I have to be careful and come out and really inspect it next spring to see if I can catch those blooms, and maybe as it gets more mature the blooms will get a little more showy, hopefully. This is a volunteer squash. It happens because I compost, and my compost isn't always probably as hot as it should be, but that's okay because I welcome volunteer squash. What are you gonna be? I'm excited. This is some thyme and a wild geranium, some asters that I've trimmed down a couple of times this season because this does tend to get tall and crazy. Tall meaning about 3 foot high, and by the time they bloom in the autumn, they are gorgeous blooms and the pollinators love them, but they do get heavy and fall to an open center. And because it's so close to the front door, I'd really like to keep it upright and bushy, so I'm trying to trim it multiple times so that it won't fall over when it blooms. We'll see if that works. There's some Siberian iris and another volunteer squash. I assume these are pumpkins because I do tend to throw pumpkins into the compost pile. It does look like it's vining, so we'll see what comes up out of it. That's a hydrangea. On the other side of the path, and I should have piped that downspout under the path this spring, and I never got around to it, but this is the rain garden, and the rain garden is really filling in as it does this time of year. The Solomon seal is there. There's balloon flower next to it that has not started blooming yet, and the Maxima rudbeckia, great coneflower, is starting to send up its flower spikes. Now these are about chest height right now. They will get taller than this. These will look like big black-eyed Susans, and these center bits here get really tall and long, probably about 3 inches. They are dark brown when they are in bloom and with bright yellow petals, and the pollinators really like them. They're a really striking specimen to have close to the pathway. This is a red aronia berry. There are berries all over it. They aren't red yet. They turn red as we get closer to the winter time. And there's a pear behind that. It did flower. I saw a couple of fruits set in the beginning of the season, but I think they've been taken or they fell with June drop. This is butterfly weed. It's part of the milkweed family, and it is a host plant for monarch butterflies. There's some strawberries as a ground cover in this rain garden, and then there's turtle heads there in the center. And I hope they don't get covered up by the American beautyberry, which starts to really grow like crazy this time of year and becomes a fountain-shaped mound that takes over a good part of this rain garden by the time the season is over. I mowed today. You can see the food forest garden beds are terraced, and I live on a sloped front yard. So as we get down towards the street, I have created this meadow strip so it catches the water as it runs down the hill. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, you know that I have a very, very sandy soil on my property, so much so that I really compare it to a beach. I do live on the Jersey Shore, so I'm very close to the beach, and that basically is the soil that makes up my yard. And so I do a lot of sheet mulching, lasagna gardening. I use wood chips and fall leaves. We are surrounded by oaks on this property, so you can see that I've got plenty of leaves falling down every fall, and I even get more from outside of my property in order to mulch my yard and make the soil more welcoming to even the native plants that I plant on the property. This is yarrow. That's filling in quite nicely. It's still blooming. It's been blooming for quite some time. These are hibiscus. They create beautiful, large pink flowers, and they should be blooming soon. I do see buds there. There are some daylilies there, and there's a sweet cherry. I have robins in the yard, and they're enjoying looking for some bugs and worms and things, and berries. They take the berries. This is more butterfly weed and New Jersey tea. New Jersey tea has leaves that can be turned into tea. This is a non-legume nitrogen fixing shrub, so it does improve the soil around it by capturing nitrogen out of the air and fixing it into nodules along its roots. It does help to improve the soil. Then there's more butterfly weed, and here is yucca. I believe this is Adam's needle. I rescued this from our local recycling center. Someone had chopped the roots out of their yard and tossed it aside, so they were pretty mangled, and they recovered nicely. Behind that, there's some lamb's ear that's blooming, and some bees are visiting it. This is a Russian quince, and there is a quince on it this year for the first time. It's so exciting that it's finally setting fruit. I have no idea how to use a quince. I know that you can't really eat those out of hand. They are a very hard fruit, so they're better for cooking with. They're not as popular in this country as they are overseas. This is the beautiful black-flowered hollyhock, and we've had a windy couple of days, so you can see that it's kind of suffering a little bit, and I think it may fall, so I do need to support that in some way. I need to bring a stake out here and take care of that. This is some alfalfa and fleabane behind it, those little white daisies, more hibiscus flowers, and this section is really to take in as a whole. I'm trying to get it to fill in with some lovely flowers. This is some garden phlox. It has not bloomed yet. This is another variety, something in the mint family that came up. That's mullein back there. It's small because it didn't seed itself there. I transplanted it when it was very young. So I'm hoping that when it does go flower and go to seed, that I can capture some of those seeds and that it will reseed in this garden area. This is some dotted horse mint that blooms later in the season, and this is a fantastic bee balm. This variety of Monarda I got from a local nursery called Moore's, and the bees are totally loving it. It's such a beautiful color. There's another daylily. There's some common milkweed, and that's an aster. We have fennel in here, and there's some mint down there, just spearmint, I think. Over here is the start of the food forest beds, and you can kind of see an overview of what they look like. This is bearberry. It's also called uva ursi, and it's a medicinal herb, but it's native to the northeastern United States. It loves sandy, dry soil, so it's perfectly at home here, and it will produce fruit that's edible but not delicious. This is tick seed or coreopsis. It's not blooming right now, but there are buds on it. There's some sedum, a Nanking cherry bush. I had cut these down and made a video about that. I'll link that. And they've grown back beautifully without signs of the blight that was bothering them and causing the leaves to wilt. And that was the reason that I cut them down in the first place. But it's grown back, as has its pollinator, which is behind this Red Haven peach tree. Below that is a lavender. There's another Virginia sweetspire and some early sunflower, which is a native perennial, actually. This is a Montauk daisy. There's some wormwood. And these are beach plums. We have 3 beach plums in the yard. There's this one, the one behind the Jersey Friendly Yards sign, and then one over here. And the beach plums are fruiting. There is some insect damage. You can see that there's some yuckiness coming out of the plums that are here. So some of them may be good to eat, but some of them probably have insect larvae in them, so I'm not interested in those. There's a geranium below it. That's a bonfire peach. It's a dwarf peach tree. There are peaches on it. I did thin them this year to try and get them to grow a little larger, but I have no idea when they're good to eat, if they're good to eat. I've never experienced them to get really soft, so that they would be I would be interested in eating them. They always seem to stay on the small side and fairly hard, so maybe it's the conditions that they're growing in. This is an Asian pear tree. There are Asian pears on it. Again, there is some bug damage on the fruit, so we'll see how many are actually good when it comes time to harvest. Over here in this bed we have a jujube. And the jujube is flowering now. The flowers are very tiny. But this fruit tends to have less pest damage than the other fruit trees because it blooms later and misses some of those common pests in their life cycle. And then below that we have some coneflower, purple coneflower. And this is cutleaf coneflower. That hasn't bloomed yet, but the purple coneflower is just starting to bloom. The sage is finishing up blooming, and I really need to trim this back. This kind of really took over the bed. This is cup plant, and this got very tall last year, so I did trim it back, and I don't know that it will bloom now. It doesn't look like it's recovering from that haircut, so perhaps that's not a plant that welcomes a haircut early in the season. This is an apricot. This apricot is a few years old now. It's very slow growing. It has not bloomed yet, but it's hanging on. It does look like it's having some kind of fungus issue on some of the branches. So we'll see if I need to do anything about that. But we do have some ladybugs that are hanging around and trying to protect it from pest damage, so that's a good thing. This is serviceberry, and that's recovering. This serviceberry I put in the first year we moved here. It was spring 2016 when it was planted, and now it's finally just this tall. Serviceberry does tend to grow fairly slowly, but it was being attacked by bunnies the first few years. So it would grow a bit and then get browsed down and grow a bit and get browsed down. The cats have really kept those bunnies away this season, so it was able to flower and actually set a few berries this year. This is lavender. There's a peony. And behind this beach plum, on this side, you can see the other Nanking cherry bush. And there is some bee balm that's just starting to flower. I see the red blush on the blooms that's getting started. Over here, this is a high bush cranberry. It's in the viburnum family, and that flowered very early, along with the strawberries. That's when the high bush cranberry blooms. This is a honeyberry, and there's a ground cover of strawberries here. Now I have, in this yard, I do have to deal with voles in this yard, especially this year. They seem to be very prolific. So some of the plants, and I think the strawberries, have suffered because usually they would be a fairly dense mat at this point in the season. But the voles have really done a number on some of the plants, which they must enjoy strawberry roots. So I'm trying to help these strawberries to recover, and I'll just keep babying the runners and try and get it to fill back in. This is another jujube. This one is really doing super well compared to that one. That one is doing okay, but this one is really happy here. That one is also flowering. The apple trees in this bed has filled in like nobody's business. Like, I can't even believe this one. So I feel like this is super crowded now. And I have to be honest with you, my garden friends, I can't stand apples. Growing apples in this climate, in this soil, along with a dense polyculture, many different kinds of plants, they just do not thrive in this yard, and I just don't want to spray. So I don't think apples are right for my garden, and I think I need to accept that. The apples never do well and always get severely attacked with lots of pest damage. So it's just not something that makes sense in a suburban landscape where you want to grow productive plants, and they're just taking up too much real estate, in my opinion. So I think this may be the last season for the apple trees. That's dotted horse mint again. There's a rose and some bronze leaf fennel. There's some cilantro that's flowered and gone to seed. This is a red leaf sand cherry, and I think that's so beautiful. It's such a splash of color in this bed. This is a black aronia berry, and it's just a monster. It's so big. I expected it to get taller than it is wide, but it's gotten quite wide, actually. There's a peony under there, more self-seeded cilantro, and some lupine that's spread around this bed as well. This is a gummy berry behind me, so there's still some fruit. This just puts on so much fruit every year, and it's tremendous. It's really sweet and delicious. The birds do like it, but I get as much as I want. So when I come and visit my plants, I have snacks from gummy berries. And the high bush cranberry is a self-fertile cranberry, viburnum. The fruit is not tasty. Oh, no, not at all. In fact, it's more astringent than standard American cranberries, in my opinion. But it can be sweetened and cooked and used the way an American cranberry would be used. This is another gummy berry, and this one is smaller than the other, but it fruits really just as well. There's a rosemary there, and it's been struggling. It was just a grocery store organic rosemary plant. So I assume that if I try a few different varieties of rosemary, maybe start them from seed, I may have more success with one that will overwinter well. But I covered this rosemary this winter, and it still sustained some frost damage. So I definitely think that I need to replace it with something that's a little more hardy. There's some hardneck garlic in here. I got most of the scapes, but you can see that I missed one. when I picked them. That's a struggling little elderberry. It's never done very well in that spot, so I think that will need to be replaced. This is the very successful elderberry. And every year I tend to prune this back fairly hard and create cuttings, create new elderberry plants. I have videos on the channel about rooting those cuttings and potting them up, and I'll link to those as well. Down here in the shade of the elderberry, there's a gooseberry. They fruit well in shade. And then that's rose campion. And that's in the path. That's one of the only plants that I let happen in the path like that. This is a clove currant. This is a native black currant, and I believe it's native to the Appalachian region of the United States. There's another volunteer squash, more coneflower, and some comfrey. I transplanted a struggling artichoke into this bed. I don't think it's going to survive, but we'll see. You never know. This is another serviceberry. This one is called Saskatoon, so it's not the same variety. The one in the front is called a Regent serviceberry, and it's a fairly dwarf variety. The Regent only gets to be about 6 feet tall. This Saskatoon serviceberry can be upwards of 15 feet tall, so I'm looking forward to that. But again, serviceberries are very slow growers. Let's see, back behind here we have some red canna and foam flower there. There's also this red lake currant, planted again in the shade of the elderberry. Plants that are in the ribe family, like gooseberries and currants, and this yastaberry here, tend to fruit well in shady conditions, so that's why I've put them back here. This is rhubarb, and I've let that go to seed, and the seed is falling now. There's some iris, and these are blueberry bushes. Like 5 blueberry bushes right here, and there's fruit on the blueberries. I didn't net them this year, so the birds are enjoying them. I do get to come out and pick a few and eat them, but I'm not picking nearly as many as I did when I netted the berries. I just didn't get around to it this year. This is the pawpaw tree. It's North America's largest native fruit. As many commenters have told me in my other videos, it is not related to the banana that we know and love in any way. Though some people say that it does taste similarly to a banana. These are 3 pawpaws. They are planted fairly close together for such large trees because they are not pollinated by bees. They're pollinated by flies and beetles. In the very early spring, we get small burgundy colored flowers that are then followed by these cool fruit. There are actually fruit on all 3 of the pawpaw trees this year, and I can't wait to harvest them because they really are delicious. They have a very tropical flavor, and I really enjoyed them. I got to try them for the first time last year. This here is another red currant, and it looks terrific and super happy. So I'm taking care to watch that carefully. There's also a brand new this season, that's a golden raspberry. And this is a golden raspberry, but behind that, that's a voodoo lily. And they're so funny because they come up, that you plant a little corm. It's very small, but it creates this really substantial plant, and it doesn't come up until well into the season. It just started coming up this week. So that's a really interesting plant. I planted it near the pawpaws because it has a flower that smells rotten, and pawpaw flowers also smell rotten. So I thought it would help pollination. I didn't realize that the bloom times would be so different, so they don't help each other at all, but they both have stinky flowers. This is a tomato, another tomato, some lemon balm, and more comfrey underneath the pawpaws. These are Egyptian walking onions, and I do have them planted all around the yard, but there are quite a few in this little container so that you can see what they are. They're a perennial bunching onion. You can eat the whole plant, and you can use them like scallions in cooking. They do create these top sets, which are little bulbits that are like mini little onions. And then those get larger and heavier and tend to fall down and replant themselves and then grow again. So that's why they're called walking onions. They're also called tree onions. And you can actually eat these little top bulbs, but it's nice to be able to pop those off and share them with your garden friends. I did cut back the gooseberry this year. The berries had some sort of a fungal thing going on. They were half formed properly and half they looked shriveled and a little strange. So I cut the whole thing down and treated the area with some compost and shredded leaves. So I'm giving that a fresh start to see what comes back there. These are some sunchokes, Jerusalem artichokes, and I've had trouble in this area in the past because of the voles. The voles really like root vegetables, and the sunchokes or Jerusalem artichokes are in the sunflower family, but they do have edible tubers, so the voles tend to love them. And I also have in this same area planted Chinese artichoke, which is this ground mint that spreads throughout the bed, and it has edible tubers, so you could see it flowering back there as well. So the voles were really taking over. You can also see I have some wild blueberries that came up. These are native blueberries. They came up. Oh, I'm so excited. Look at that. There's blue ones. Oh, I'm picking them before the birds get them. They're little. But these are lovely, and they grow wild all around here. And I let them come up, and I welcome them to the garden. And I planted some garlic, softneck garlic, among these sunchokes last year. The sunchokes are coming back. The voles did not take them all last year. So I'm going to let that be and plant more garlic in here in the fall. And that is the front yard garden tour in June 2022. Let's see what's over here. We have some lavender in pots. We have a lilac. This is a lilac that was gifted to me by a friend. I planted it in the spring this year, so I think it's going to do well. And lemon balm, more thyme, and a small rose, some more butterfly weed, and a pulmonaria, that's lungwort, and that blooms in very early spring. Look at the leaves. They look like they've been splashed by paint. Aren't they beautiful? They grow really well in shady conditions. And there we go. Thanks for joining me, everyone. I hope your garden is lush this year and that you have a wonderful harvest. Join me again for all my garden updates. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video. I'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.